Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Comics Lair for our discussion of Retcons, the good, the bad, and the really ugly. The Comics Lair is sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott, and we'll start with asking the panel to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about how long they've been comics fans. Ron, will you start?
Sure. My name's Ron Garner. Let's see. I've done a lot of different things in my life as far as background. I haven't stuck with any one thing. I started off life as an IT guy, then became a Marine for 22 years, and now I work as a policy guy for the Department of Defense. Ran a publishing company for a while. Have written quite a bit. Oh gosh, you know what? I have loved comics since I was a kid, particularly Superman comics. I have on most things, in most of my life, just kind of collected very specific things, right? I'm looking for a key comic, or I'm looking for a writer, or I'm looking for an artist. But for some reason with Superman, I was an absolute completist. And so I actually wound up recently getting rid of most of my collection, but there was a point where I had every Superman comic going back to like 1960 from every line. And I had a whole bunch from the 40s and 50s. I don't know. It was an obsession. I think I'm a recovering addict. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Okay. Marisa?
Hi, I'm Marisa Wolf. I am a science fiction and fantasy author. I'm a second generation nerd. My dad was a Star Trek and comic book nerd. So I've been reading comics since I was old enough to be trusted to hold them. And my dad was a DC guy, so I went Marvel, and then read all of his DC comics. So huge X-Men nerd, more than almost anything. And I'm not going to do that math. So it's hopefully longer than you think that I've been reading them, but long enough. Decades.
John?
Hey, John L. French. I'm a retired crime scene investigator. And it was in that capacity that I was asked to advise, be the technical advisor on a couple of Legend of Dark Knight books written by C.J. Henderson. As a result, I got myself and one of my colleagues were drawn into the book as crime scene investigators helping Captain James Gordon. And I was the one who taught Harvey Bullock about small particle reagent, which allows you to take fingerprints in the rain. I am a writer. Some of my books you can see behind me. I have done some work in comic books, at least as far as comic book characters, but in anthologies. And as far as how long I've been a comic book fan, I was reading Batman before Adam West became Batman.
Fraser?
My name is Fraser Sherman. I write primarily historical fantasy and also film reference books. My first comic book, I was 6 years old, 1964, Justice League of America 30, second half of the second Justice League Justice Society team-up. I was hooked from that point on, and I remain hooked. I have a lot of individual issues, a lot of stuff in TPB, more DC than Marvel, though I have a fair amount of Marvel too.
David?
I'm David R. Slayton. I'm the author of the Adam Binder urban fantasy novels. The first one, White Trash Warlock, is behind me. And my first high fantasy or epic fantasy, Dark Moon Shallow Sea, comes out this year. So I write fantasy of all types. I write a few other things. Just go to my website to find it. For comic books, I'm kind of a latecomer. I grew up with the Super Friends cartoon and the Adam West reruns and the Linda Carter reruns. And my first comic book was actually Transformers of all thing. And then but there was a Spider-Man crossover early on when he had the black costume. So I slowly made my way over and became a giant comic book fan.
Well, those of you who've been here before may remember that I write historical fantasy for Falstaff Books. I independently publish several subgenres of romance. And with Jeannie Adams, I write the Outcast Station Outer Space Adventure series. I've been a comics fan since I was 8 years old. And I probably wouldn't have been allowed to go down that road had anyone other than my mother's father bought that first comic book, because she was not a fan of this idea. But because her father had bought it for me and my father didn't see anything wrong with it, I got to keep going and spend my little 25 cents allowance on comic books every week, which was a lot of fun. So all of us have been reading long enough to have experienced multiple retcons. But before we actually get into particular ones, let's agree what they are. I mean, I'm thinking of it as a retroactive change in continuity, sometimes to explain things, sometimes to fix an error or omission, and sometimes to change a book's directions. Does anybody want to add anything to that or disagree with it?
Sounds good to me.
I would like to throw in, whether or not we bring it up, the first use of retroactive continuity in comics was more about untold tales from someone's past, like Invaders taking place, untold stories of Cap, the Torch, and Namor in the 1940s. And I think that's an important part of it too, even though that meaning is less now.
Okay, anybody else? No. Okay, well, let's start off on a positive note with retcons that we really liked. We'll do a couple of rounds of this, so just give me one this time. And what? Okay, let me just straighten out my mouth so I can talk here. Give me one that you liked and explain why you liked it. Marisa?
Does it count if it's a retcon of a retcon?
Sure, it's fine.
Okay. I very much liked when Marvel very quickly unretconned or re-retconned that Captain America had been a Hydra agent the whole time. Captain America was not what? Come on. It was some edgy nonsense. And so the fact that they pretty quickly were like, JK, this was all a secret agent thing. I was like, okay, I can be back in. I could not get on board with Captain America being a Hydra agent. So that is a good retcon of a retcon. I am still to this day sad that they didn't let Jean Grey keep the repercussions and consequences of having been Dark Phoenix.
Okay, well, I expect we will get to that. John?
Okay, going all the way back, and this is before I started reading comics, the whole DC Silver Age was basically a retcon of the DC characters, the Justice Society, in the Golden Age. So this was kind of like, well, you know about Flash, you know about Green Lantern, or you think you know about Flash, you think you know about Green Lantern, you think you know about Hawkman. Forget all that. This is what really happened. And so if it hadn't been for that retcon, which was, by our definition, that's what it was, we would not have had the comics we had today.
Okay, Fraser?
This one is also kind of a retcon of a retcon. When Captain America was thawed out in the ice in the Silver Age, Stanley effectively erased all his post-war adventures, which had run up to 1950, and then a short while in the middle of the 50s. In the Bronze Age, Steve Englehart did a story in which turned out the 1950s Cap, who had been an aggressive anti-communist, had been he had existed. He was a separate person who had duplicated the super soldier formula, gotten it wrong, went crazy, been placed in suspended animation, and now thawed out. And from that, subsequently, all the other Captain America post-war adventures were eventually explained as, we need someone to fill Captain America's shoes. You are chosen. And so the Steve Englehart story was great, but what has followed from it has also been very productive.
David?
I love the Bucky wasn't dead, coming back as the Winter Soldier. That's my favorite retcon of all time. I feel like it opened up so many great stories. I just think that's really the best retcon in my experience. I love a lot of what happened in DC with the Crisis. So, and again, I came to comics a little bit later. So a lot of what happens with Crisis on Infinite Earths, as somebody who was young trying to get into DC continuity and going back to the Golden Age and Silver Age, I was just lost. So Crisis for me, as a new jump on point for Wonder Woman characters like that, gave me the ability to feel like I was there at the start. So I love a lot of the Crisis retcons, and a lot of it made more sense to me. But honestly, the Cap Bucky thing is my all-time favorite retcon.
Okay, Ron.
So I'm actually gonna talk about a retcon that's more recent, but I have to say my all-time favorite retcon, like David, is the Bucky thing. I think the impact of that on the Marvel universe and characters that not just Cap, but characters that surround Cap in that universe, I think it's just so important. So I love that. But relatively recently, one that I've really loved is when David Banner was or when Banner was excuse me, David, when Banner was exposed to the gamma rays, that he actually like went and touched something much larger than himself, right? And that has impacted the entire universe, and that whenever a Hulk dies, they go back to that, and they just, generally don't remember it, right? Like, I thought that the richness of that story was amazing. And I just loved it. I love that entire run. And so maybe that's colored. My love for that retcon is colored by my love for that run.
Well, one of my favorite retcons was done by Chuck Dixon in Nightwing. And he retconned the Dick Grayson, Barbara Gordon relationship so that they had actually had a relationship somewhere between the end of the Batman family book and the beginning of the Nightwing book. They had a relationship. And one of the things I liked about it was that I thought the age difference made it interesting compared to a lot of relationships in comics. And I thought that they worked well as a pair because she was in Birds of Prey and he was in Nightwing, and they crossed over into each other's books now and again. But they both had their own books going and their own stories going, and they just did things together every now and again. And I really liked that. But before we move on, would anybody like to say anything about one of the ones someone else mentioned? Any thoughts or reactions to it?
I'd triple down on the Bucky Winter Soldier one. Like, I do remember that phrase of like, nobody stays dead except Bucky Barnes, Jason Todd, and Uncle Ben. And it's really just Uncle Ben. Sorry, Ben. But like, it was good.
I will say. I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
I said, well, you do have the DC characters who started off dead. The Spectre, Dead Man. If he wasn't dead, he needed to change his name. But even that has been played with.
Yeah, Marisa, I will say one of the things that you said earlier about and this is, I know, not on the topic of good retcons, but one of the things you said about Jean Grey not experiencing the repercussions of everything that happened with the Phoenix, while I certainly would have liked to see a storyline about her experiencing the repercussions, I do like the fact that they brought Jean Grey back, right? I think that had such a massive impact on the X-Men storylines going forward.
Yeah, I love every time Jean Grey comes back. I know people got sick of it for a while, but I love her. I always love when she comes back. I mean, they made her the Phoenix. She's going to come back. It's in the name.
Yeah.
Well, and to me, it seems sort of like, okay, she wiped out all these people, so there have to be repercussions to that. Mm-hmm. Fine. That's Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics also publishes a character called Galactus.
Thank you.
And nothing bad seems to happen to Galactus when he goes around.
Richard saved Galactus' life. And then, because we can't kill him just because he kills thousands of worlds, we must be nice.
Rachel tried, though, in Excalibur when she had the Phoenix Force. She certainly made a noble effort.
She did.
Yeah.
She's one of my favorite Phoenix carriers. in part for that, but for many reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody want to add anything else before we move on?
You mentioned, I mentioned earlier the Silver Age retcon to the heroes, but the one that follows that is when the Barry Allen Flash vibrated at a certain frequency and wound up on what is, for some strange reason, called Earth 2, even though it's older than ours, Earth 2, and they brought back all the Golden Age heroes. And as a kid, when I started reading about this Flash with a helmet on, and why is Green Lantern dressed funny, and who is this Captain, is Dr. Midnight guy? I mean, it was like a whole new world has been discovered. So yeah, the Silver Age was my favorite retcon, but closely followed is the Flash of Two Worlds.
Yeah,
which led into everything else, which led into the infinite worlds.
Yeah, I loved the Flash of Two Worlds. That just made it just made everything better, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't know. It is one of my all-time favorite things to happen in a comic book universe.
That's such a great point, John, because like that's when I love a retcon, right? When it makes the world bigger and more interesting. And so when it ties things together and it makes logical sense or fantastic sense, I don't care. But that idea of like all of these heroes you've ever known or heard about, they all exist. It's just this spectrum of Earth. Like I can still picture that art where you see like the Earths going, just stretching out into space. Yeah, I love that. That's a great one.
I also love it when they fix things. What Marissa's saying, like when a good retcon that can repair a bad story. And I know we're about to get into the ugly, so I'll save my example. There's one that just still bugs me to the end that I'm like so glad that's been kind of
only one.
Well, there's a few, but there's one that I just find utterly egregious. So
okay, well, hold that thought, and we'll come back to it. But before we move in that direction, let's do one more round of ones that we like, just to be sure that we're kind of positive here. John, will you start?
Okay. Ones that I liked. But it was only afterwards when they I can't, for the life of me, I can't think of the person's name, but he was the human host of the Spectre.
Jim Corrigan,
thank you. And they did, when Ostrander finished the series, they gave Corrigan the funeral and the peace he deserved. And then they bounced around a lot, and then there was Hal Jordan as the Spectre, which was a completely different experience. But then they brought in the guy from GCPD.
Christmas.
And he I mean, I didn't like it at first, but on rereading it, this version of the Spectre was absolute. His struggle to balance his humanity, and then of course something happened and we've got Jim again. Poor bastard.
John, we're losing a little bit of what you say every now and again, just a word here and there. Will you say that last sentence over again, please?
All right. I said after the Spectre from GCPD, which was absolutely terrific. Things happened, and now we're back with Jim Gordon.
Okay, thank you. Fraser?
Dr. Fate, in the 1940s, he was just a powerful wizard in a costume, albeit with a helmet, a really kick-ass costume. In 1973, early 70s, first issue special 9, Walt Simonson and Martin Pascoe came up with the idea. He does not wear the helmet. The helmet wears him. The personality of his teacher, Naboo, is in the helmet and it controls him. And that was a great change, and it has been the norm ever since. And it has been retconned back to some of Roy Thomas retconned back to apply it to some of his 1940s adventures. And I think that was an outstanding change in the status quo, and it has worked. And it also opened up opportunities, like John was saying just now, for somebody else to take on the helmet and for all kinds of tricks to be played. So I think that was a great retcon.
David?
Oh man, I had just had it and I got really obsessed about Dr. Fate there for a second because I love Dr. Fate so much. I really loved a lot of what Peter David did in his X Factor run, the longer run. And I'm not really sure if you can call them retcons, but he just did this really amazing thing of picking up B or C level characters and then picking up story threads that have been dropped and deepening them. So not necessarily making massive changes to history, but I was this massive X-Men reader, and I was reading it during the time with X-Men Gold and Blue the first time, and X-Force and X-Factor, when X-Men was just dominating the racks. And I remember how writers kept changing. So, for example, like when Shatterstar and Richter started to get together, but then the writer changed and they split, and you never got this culmination. And then something like 30 years later, Peter David picked up that thread and brought it out and teased it out. And he's so good at that. He was always so good at finding these little things that if you're a real continuity nerd, that you're like, oh, wow, what happened? And he'd find those little dangling threads and tie them off. And I'll always remember, like, finally, that thing I've been waiting 30 years has come back.
Yeah. James Robinson in his Starman series was very good at that. Even to the point of taking an obscure Batman comic where Bruce Wayne had to become Starman for an issue, for the dumbest reasons, but and incorporating that particular Starman and giving him an identity other than Bruce Wayne. I mean, he's very good at that sort of thing. So, bringing out the minutia of the history of the DC and turning it into a DC storyline.
Rod?
There are so many that I like. I mean, I certainly like the fact that Wolverine has actual claws.
Oh, that was
mine. Sorry, I just took you for the throwaway. I apologize for that. I'm going to go with a weird one. I really like Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. And I like the fact that he made Swamp Thing a plant that came into the form of a vegetation that came into the form of a human, right? Like, I think that allowed for an exploration of that character that hadn't been done before. So I really enjoyed that.
Marisa?
I'm still going to talk about Wolverine's bone claws, because when I read that I loved it. At first I was like, this is terrible, I hate it. But like 2 seconds later, I was like, I'm obsessed with this. It was such an interesting thing to me that you knew Wolverine had some memory issues. He didn't exactly remember what had happened to him, but for it to be that fundamental that he did not remember like what he was before at all. I was like, yeah, I can see it. It made sense in the story. It made way more sense than Wolverine thinking he should fight Magneto when he is made of metal. So that's fine. I was much more into the bone claws and just his whole kind of like arc after that, where he was just trying to deal with everything, and the graphic, like the art was amazing, because like the adamantium is just like shit, like snick, whatever the noise was, just came right out, but the bone, like it seemed like bones were erupting from his hand. Yeah, it was nasty, and like you see the skin split, and it was ugh. And you just think about like what life is like for Wolverine all the time. Like, no wonder he's so grumpy and cigar chomping. Anyway, I loved it. It was great.
Well, this is one I've been told is a retcon. I've never been much of a Hawkman reader previously, but I follow this guy named Tim Board, who does Hawkworld on Twitter, and he also does it on Facebook. And Tim Board raving about the Hawkman book got me to pick it up. And oh my word, Hawkman apparently has had many different origins through the years, kind of like Donna Troy, but maybe not quite as bad. And Chip Zdarsky took all those origins and wove them into one. And the writing was so good, and the art was so good. And that book, I don't know, I really wish DC had put some money behind promoting that book, because it was enough to make me into a Hawkman fan, because they had this cool origin going. And, I've read Hawkman 3 or 4 times over the years, but he's not like he's got a character who got a lot of play through the years. He'd show up in the Justice League every now and again, and every once in a while in a solo book. But I really, really liked that book and was sorry and a little annoyed to see it go away. Does anybody want to say anything about anything else that somebody else? Yeah, Fraser.
First, yes, Hawkman, post-crisis, his continuity was screwed up as badly as Donna Troy. And I'm sorry, John, I read the Batman as Starman story, and it's actually quite well done. We can agree to disagree.
Yes.
That was it.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, well then why don't we move on to the part where we gripe about things?
Yeah.
So why don't we just blend the bad and the really ugly and talk about those for a while? And let's pick one and talk about it, each of us. And Fraser, will you start?
Okay, I'll start with one that has annoyed me from DC's New 52 era, Wonder Woman as the daughter of Zeus. I love the idea of her as play fashioned by a woman, empowered by a goddess. It's an iconic origin. It works. There is no reason for the Zeus thing other than they wanted to tell stories about the gods and not about mortals. And I think it is not the first time that somebody has given her a father. I won't go into detail, but I thought it sucked. And unfortunately, being attached to the movie, it will probably stick around for a while. So that is one that annoys me much.
Okay, David, here's your shot at the egregious one.
First of all, everything Fraser just said, because again, the clay origin, the well of souls, and I know it's come back now a little bit in a different way, but again, it's feminist. It drew on so much like Merlin Stone's writing and Barbara J. Walker, and then to go, she's the daughter of Zeus. It is not, however, in my mind, as icky as Gwen Stacy having sex with Norman Osborn.
Oh God,
that was nasty. It was just perverse. It was, that whole thing that needed to not happen. That in my mind is the worst retcon. And I can see editorial insertions again, like Peter and MJ's marriage needed to end because editorial didn't want married characters anymore. Still think it's dumb, whatever. But the Gwen Stacy and Norman having had a relationship before she died, I just thought that was just icky and inappropriate, and somebody trying for edgy, and it just, I'll hate it I'll die mad about it.
Ron?
Oh, well, I also have one that I'll die mad about, and that is Quicksilver and Wanda not being Magneto's kids. I will never be okay with that.
That was my runner-up.
Did you want to say anything else about it?
Nope, that's it. I hate it with a burning passion, and I think that's all that needs to be said.
Okay.
And also it destroys, right? Like it destroys, particularly in that story, it kind of destroys a big payoff in the relationship between Magneto and Wanda. And so it doesn't even make sense within the story. So it not only is bad for the universe, it wasn't even good for the story.
Marisa?
Yeah, just big yes, all of those. So another one I will die mad about is every time they made Professor X secretly evil. I don't love this. Yeah, what was that?
Onslaught and the whole sexual obsession with Jean. Again, very
disgusting. Yeah, especially when it's just like, you're gonna make this character permanently creepy now. This character that was awesome is now disgusting. But whether it was his like evil twin sister Cassandra, whether it was he had a first team that all died, and that's why he recruited stronger mutants because they were just throwaways to him. Like it makes the Magneto Professor X line not as good. It makes Professor X hard to recover from. And I get the whole like a telepath could just be secretly evil because he can make you do whatever he wants. That's super fun to play with, but doesn't have to be Professor X. We have other telepaths. Like we could do that. So
Okay, John.
Okay, first of all, Fraser and I are going to disagree again because I really liked the new 52 Wonder Woman. I thought the whole storyline was wonderful. I loved the way the gods were presented, and it was, let's put it this way, the hardcovers are on my bookshelf. But if I had to pick one retcon that I wish I could retcon out, it would be the new 52 itself. It's just, it wasn't the individual books. I mean, I always wondered what Superman and Wonder Woman were the side of, Kingdom Come, other Elseworld. But, I didn't like the fact that, and it was okay, the fact that they were newer heroes, but the whole concept of the world saw them as villains, as people who needed to be controlled. These are people who are doing good and everybody seemed to turn against them. And to me, that seemed to go against the very spirit of DC. And they came up with some great books. Frankenstein, Agent of Shade. I love that book. A few others, but as a whole, I think, like I said, I wish they could retcon the whole. Well, they did, thanks to Dr. Manhattan. But I wish that the whole new 52 hadn't happened. That was I think the worst I've ever had.
Well, mine is. It's very hard for me to pick one to start off with, but one that I really, truly despise and abhor, and I don't think it did any good whatsoever, is allowing John Byrne to say that Superman had never been Superboy. Because I've been a Legion of Superheroes fan since grade school, and it gutted the continuity of the Legion, who were inspired by, Superboy. And so I'm sure everybody thought that was edgy and cool, and, Legion fans were a little weird, but people were like, well, it's John Byrne. It's important. I don't really care who it is. And now all these years later, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever, except that it opened the door for Brian Michael Bendis to have Superman's son be the inspiration for his version of the Legion of Superheroes.
Yeah.
But the Pocket Universe and all that, Levitz and Giffen did what they could to salvage it, but it was not as good as the original continuity, in my opinion.
I think that's one of, maybe we can talk about that, is when there is a retcon, it's like dropping a rock into a pool and there's ripples going out. For instance, the whole Crisis on Infinite Earths did away with, any Earth but the current Earth, which means they had to come up with a Justice Society that did not include Batman, Superman, etc. And they had to, there was no Golden Age Hawkman, and then they gave the current Hawkman a completely new origin, in which his origin story was that he was a murderer, even if he was a police officer, and that kind of screwed up the whole. What do you do with the old histories of Hawkman? Sort of like, what do we do with the Captain America, who was the post-war Captain America? And so when they do a retcon, it screws everything up, and they take forever to try to straighten it out. Hawkman's origin is still in flux, just like Donna Troy's, and the whole mess about where did the Legion of Superheroes come from was never adequately resolved in my case. The Pocket Universe was an idea, but it wasn't an overly good idea, but at least it gave us a Peter David Supergirl.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add anything?
I liked the Peter David Supergirl.
I loved it.
I thought it was such a cool take and different for the character. I liked her powers. I just wanted to tack it on.
I also like the Matrix Supergirl before Peter David did well, but I like the Matrix Supergirl who first emerged from the Pocket Universe. She was a lot of fun.
Yeah, even if she did have made bad choices in boyfriends.
Indeed. They
I
did
also
not-
like Peter David's continuation, and I can't remember what it was. It was it was in DC for a while, and then it moved
Dark
over.
Angel, maybe, or is something. It had an angel.
Fallen Angel.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, and the whole once it moved away from DC, it got even better.
Well, we have some more. Was somebody trying to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, we could probably talk about retcons from the New 52 that we don't like all day long. But I will throw in one more that I really, really disliked, and that was making Victor Freeze's wife not his wife, right?
Oh,
Like that was just super weird, because you took this, Batman's got a lot of one-dimensional villains, right? And you took this guy who had dimension, right? Who you could relate to because he had somebody that he loved, that he was trying to save, regardless of whether she was a good person or not, depending on the storyline. But he had somebody that he loved, and you could relate to that. And then they made her not his wife, and him just some creepy stalker guy who fell in love with a woman that was frozen, right? I just completely destroyed the character.
I think that's my big complaint about Retcon, because I was over here like, okay, I hated when they made Captain America bad or Professor X bad, but they made Jean Grey bad, and then they're like, JK, it's not her. It's like John is saying, when you throw a rock and you're not taking into account all the ripples, like when you're retconning something just because there's character development and you don't know what to do with it anymore, or you're like, JK, I didn't like this character development, like the slow corruption that makes sense of a hero is interesting. Saying a hero was terrible all along, not interesting. But so for me, that's the thing, when they're like, we did all this character development and now we don't want MJ and Spider-Man to be married anymore. So here's the devil, we're going to make a deal. Or nope, it wasn't Jean Grey at all. She was in a little tomb under the harbor, where makes total sense. Like, that's infuriating. And I think those are the ones I will die mad about.
Part of the trouble, I think, is that, well, like Professor X, they do one story where he did something morally questionable. Then somebody else says, hey, that was a good story. I'll do another story where he did something. And pretty soon you've gone from, as you say, Marissa, morally questionable once or twice to pretty much villainous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And and compare that to the way they corrupted Hal Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they did not take away his heroic past. He had been the the greatest Green Lantern of all, barring whatever Sinestro might say. But it was when Coast City was destroyed, and he tried to bring it back, and they wouldn't let him, and he just snapped. And so that was understandable. Mm-hmm. And then he was parallaxed for a long time, and I'm still don't really like Jeff Johns' reason for bringing Hal back. Mm-hmm. That he had this evil parallax within him. But it's just, but the way they corrupted Hal Jordan did not erase. It wasn't like, well, he was secretly an ally of Sinestro all along, mm-hmm. Type of thing. No, he had been a hero, but now he's a fallen hero.
One of the other things I love about the corruption of Hal Jordan and him being brought back is that, in a lot of stories, when they bring somebody back like that, they've given them an excuse. Parallax is this evil thing that was inhabiting him. He's got an excuse and there are no repercussions. But like, if you continue to read Green Lantern, Hal has repercussions for that for the rest of Green Lantern, right? Like there are people who never forget, and it always has an impact on his life. And I think that's important. I think that shows, some real character development, and it shows him having to deal with the consequences of his actions, even if he wasn't fully in control. Yeah. And reflects the way that people view people who do things, even if they know that they weren't fully in control of themselves.
There's a great line in the Trial of the Winter Soldier arc where the prosecutor gets up, and it could almost be meta commentary. And so Bucky Barnes committed all these assassinations because he was mind controlled. Have you ever noticed how when superheroes go bad, it's always mind control?
Yeah.
Well, and I think Ron's hitting on something that, for me, the idea that there's redemption, or I like complex characters, and so my city was destroyed. I snapped. I have to work my way back. I have to earn forgiveness is earned slowly. It's not just we're not talking about Star Wars, but Kylo Ren. Okay, I just turned to the light at the last minute, and then boom, all is forgiven. That stuff bugs me. There should be work. There should be redemption. There should be locutus situations where years later people are like, "You're the guy that killed all of us." Situations like that. And one of the ways to stop that ripple effect I've noticed just reading comics, especially in New X-Men, Grant Morrison is so smart about this, because what he will do is he won't fundamentally change the character. What he'll do is he'll have another character make a statement. This is who Wolverine is. And then that's been put out there, and within his run, that's kind of everyone sort of agreeing with it. But because it didn't fundamentally change Wolverine, at the end of the run, you can put that back in the box or say, nope, that was just Quentin's impression of Wolverine. I just always thought that was a really smart way to stop those ripples from being so problematic.
Yeah. I still think Batman, kind of looks sideways at Hal Jordan whenever they show up, and in the back of his mind, he's got like 4 or 5 different ways of stopping Hal, for not if, but when he goes bad again.
But I always like John Stewart's comment on that. You don't trust Hal because you like to scare people. Hal's a man without fear, so you ain't nothing to him.
Yeah. But then again, if you look at John Stewart, he's still feeling the repercussions of that one lapse in judgment where he allowed a whole planet to be destroyed.
Yeah.
It still haunts him.
Yeah.
But sometimes they pass up a good opportunity by not exploring the ripples. There's a retcon that, on the one hand, I see the reason for it, and it's actually pretty smart. But on the other hand, it really bothers me. And I think it bothers me because it's never really been explored. And that's the Legion of Superheroes story, where we find out that Lightning Lad was not, in fact, brought back to life by the life force transfer machine, that actually Prody, who everybody thought died to save Lightning Lad, had been inhabiting Lightning Lad's body all along.
I hate that retcon.
Well, I can sort of see why it would be attractive, because the dude had been dead for like 8 or 9 issues. So to say, it's like when the sorcerer offered Conan that he'd bring back Bayleet, and she was icky. So you can sort of see why that might not be a really workable solution. But, the first Legion story I read was The Stolen Superpowers, and that was the story in which Lightning Lad died to save Saturn Girl. And so my childish heart, as I've said before, went bang, ba-bang, and fell in love with them as a pair. And so by the time this retcon came along, they had been married, they had children, and it was kind of like, oh, by the way, I'm really Prody. And everybody went, oh, okay, and moved on. And there was a potentially wonderful story there, and nobody explored it. And had they explored it, I might have liked that retcon. But let's see, we don't know at what point Saturn Girl found out about it. Was Prody impersonating Lightning Lad while trying to make her fall in love with him because, ooh. And then once you find out about it, if you're attracted to somebody and all of a sudden you find out that someone else is inhabiting their skin, ooh. And so it just kind of got tossed out there and it vanished. And so I understand why Fraser feels the way he does, because sometimes I feel that way about it too. But at the same time, I look at it and I think, well, that would have been ripples. But I guess it was not convenient to explore the ripples. And given that this is a comic book and we need a lot of stuff blowing up and a lot of action adventure, maybe that's not the right format. But there would have been ripples through the Legion for that when people found out, and there really weren't. Well, we've got about 10, 15 minutes left. So let's try something else. If you could retcon anything in any of the comics you read, what would you pick? And David, it's your turn to go first.
Oh man, I knew you were going to do that to me. I would probably do something along the lines of finding a way to let continuity end, or let it, or stop bringing people back from the dead, like make death more permanent. And I know that, and there's so many examples of that. But if there's one thing I would fix in all of continuity, and Nancy, you can guess what it is because we ranted about this together on a panel very recently. I would stop messing with poor Donna Troy. I would just leave Donna alone. Damn it. She's one of my favorite characters. I hate all the weirdness about the retconning and the stuff. I thought once she got to the Troya point, that was perfect for her. I just would have, with the, Wolfman Perez, I didn't like the costume. That's fine, but I would have left her alone at that point. And or that was like, just let it be. Stop. Put her in a box and stop letting people retcon her and change. That, and then my follow would probably be, they've messed with Tim Drake so much that, like, he was never Robin at one point in the New 52, which was my big New 52 sin. He was never Robin. He was always Red Robin. I would sort out some timeline stuff, and I would put a law in place that you can never name the character's age, because that screws up Batman continuity constantly. Because someone did the math that, like, Bruce would have had to have been 19 when he adopted Dick, or took Dick on. And so I would just leave their ages a little more vague, guys, and you don't have these problems.
Okay, Ron?
There's actually there's a whole raft. You mentioned, David, you mentioned Donna Troy, but there's actually a whole raft of DC characters who just continue to get retconned, who I would just say, stop, right? Let's find a path for these characters and just move forward with it and just stop, right? So Donna Troy's one of those, and Hawkman, obviously one of those, right? Power Girl, another one of those. Like, let's just stop. I mean, these poor characters must have multiple personality disorder at this point, right?
That's Moon Knight.
What's that?
That's Moon Knight.
Yeah, that's right. That's Moon Knight. Yeah, so I think that's that's not a thing I would retcon. I think that's a thing that I would just ask them to stop retconning, I guess. It just you don't have, and it's always these kind of secondary characters, right? Who are just continually messed with. I mean, all characters are going to get retconned at some point, because whether it's true or not, the people who are running the comic book companies are going to think that the character's gotten stale and that they need to do something to change that. Not tell a compelling story, but change the character, right? So I get that, but these secondary characters seem to be the place that authors feel like they can play around and get in there and just make changes kind of willy-nilly. And I really like some of these characters. I'd like to see that stop happening.
Okay. Marisa?
I like this, like, rule and retcon thing. So the rule I would make is, if you're a new comic book author that wants to put, like, your stamp on a distinctive character, you would have a short run, like when Neil Gaiman did 1642. Like, you would get to take your little people and do your little Elseworld and tell the story you want to tell, but you still have main continuity, because and the thing I would retcon, because it was one of the first things that broke my little comic book heart, Jean Grey was the Phoenix the whole freaking time. So she didn't get cocooned under the water. She came through, she took on the Phoenix, it slowly corrupted her. She was part of the Hellfire Club. You could still have Madeline Pryor cloned and come into Scott's life if you really need to, because Jean Grey's out atoning or still being evil or doing something. And then she has a long, slow reckoning with the Phoenix Force, because my favorite recurring thing is how the Phoenix Force is, like, obsessed with Jean Grey, and that they, like, find a healthy partnership. And maybe it's because Rachel comes back from Days of Future Past. No, was it Execution? Whichever terrible future that Rachel came from, that my brain refuses to call it.
It was
right
Days
now.
of Future Past.
Thank you. Okay, I said it and I was like, oh no, maybe that's not right.
I can tell that this Jean Grey thing is a big thing for you.
It's clearly
you
a big
mentioned
thing
it a couple
for
of
me.
times.
Yeah, it was like the first thing because I started reading comics in the early 80s, and it had happened already. So I got to read the whole run in like a collected thing. And I was like, wait, what? And also I hadn't started reading Excalibur yet, so I didn't have Kitty to glom onto. So Jean was like, this is my girl X-Men. Like I love it. And then it just felt like a cheap ploy of like, she never went bad. She's always our perfect angel. We love her the most. And it was terrible. Like I would fix it. I would let her be evil. I would let her come back from it. Maybe the White Queen and Scott never hook up because that's disgusting. But other things can happen through that. But that is my story.
You know what? Now that you mention it, I'd like to add a rule to this whole rule of retconning, right? And that is, if you were going to change something fundamental about a character's character, then you have to do what like my drama teacher used to tell me, right? Show me, don't tell me.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
100%.
I have to see them change. You can't just come to me one day and tell me that Professor X is evil, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one Hail Hydra does not change. Yeah, it does not change 50 years of you can't. No. Agreed.
Yeah. Well, I second White Queen and Scott disgusting, but it's John's turn to give us his.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, I've thought about this. One fundamental change in the DC universe. I would like to see Batman, who got his origin in Detective Comics, go back to being a someone who basically gets on the crime scene, reads the crime scene, and tell Gordon, what happened, and then goes up. I wish way back when, as long as we're retconning, Batman had told the Justice League, look, you guys, the superpowers, I don't. I'll take care of Gotham. You take care of the rest of the world. Don't call me unless you need. Because that's what. There's the bat signal. Let's go, Robin. Batman has. He's got a lot of special abilities, but he doesn't have any superpower, and he should concentrate on taking care of Gotham, occasionally helping the League of Batmen, as Batman Incorporated is what, but stay out of the world events, because except as a general, except as somebody, running things, or unless they need somebody to do something sneaky, Superman and the assorted, people, and the people with superpowers are pretty much capable of handling. Let Batman be Batman and let him protect Gotham. Lord knows it needs it.
Fraser?
If I were to make a rule, it would be, and I'll give you an example in a second, if people acting in character behave like shits or selfish or rotten, do not then go back and retcon that out, because, as Marisa says, they have to be nice. Doctor Strange, his whole origin is a redemption arc. He was a brilliant surgeon, horrible human being. He had to learn to put other people first, and that is what happens. But I've seen more than one attempt to go back and explain that, no, he was just messed up because Mordo knew he was in danger and tried to destroy him, or he had bad parenting, or somehow explain it so he's not really a bad person. Enough. He was a shit. Let him be a shit. He's not a shit now. He's a hero. That should be enough. And that applies to everyone else in that boat.
Actually, the storyline of a bad person becoming a better person and then a hero is much more interesting than, he was a good guy all the time.
Yes.
Because there's no redemption. I've been told that most of my books have some kind of redemption arc in it, which is why I wrote one where nobody got redeemed. But you have to have somebody, you have to have a reason for people to be redeemed. You know, a good guy who stays a good guy and is always a good guy might be interesting, but a good guy who for whatever reason became a bad guy and then had to fight his way back to redemption is much more interesting. And things like what I really liked was when Lex Luthor decided that he was going to be a hero.
Mm.
I mean, it was for his own self-aggrandizement, but for a while, Luthor was a hero. And then they decided, well, he's no fun as a hero. Let's have him form the Legion of Doom and destroy the known universe. But the redemption arcs, or the fall, the rise, the fall, and the rise again are always more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You and I are a little bit at odds on this, because I thought the redemption miniseries for Wally West as the Flash, after that abysmal thing called Heroes in Crisis, was really good look at Wally as a character. But if I could retcon away one thing, Heroes in Crisis would never have happened. It would be Superman is under the influence of green kryptonite and he hallucinated the whole thing. Because the idea of Wally West killing all these people, then killing his future self to cover it up, it's like, have you ever read a Wally West adventure before? And so I agree with you that redemption arcs are great. And I think a good character who does something bad, thinking he has a good reason for it, sucks me into that redemption arc, because I want to see how the character gets back from there. But it was like, did you just write this and plug Wally West in because you needed somebody to plug in? I mean,
that's what I got from it. They wrote it without knowing who done it.
Yeah, and and Harley Quinn takes on the Trinity and wins. Excuse me? In what universe does that happen? So, I mean, if I could get rid of one thing and retcon it forever away, it would be Heroes in Crisis. I think I would do that as well. Because
although I did like the idea of a place where superheroes with problems could go and fall down. That was a great frame for telling a lot of stories.
Yeah, and it would have been had they
done
that.
I really appreciated that they tried to address the issue of PTSD.
But
right?
you can't. Oh, sorry.
I appreciate the attempt. I did not like the execution, but I certainly appreciated the attempt to recognize the fact that people who have been in that type of traumatic situation repeatedly for extended periods of time are going to experience some sort of PTSD, regardless of how strong they are, how good they are, whatever, right?
But you can't really address it because there is simply no way to deal with it. It would be like trying to have a clinic where you deal with all the head trauma they get from being knocked out. Batman would realistically be a vegetable by now. There is no way you're going to get around that realistically. Pretty much the same thing with the PTSD. You can never really deal with it well, I don't think.
I don't know. I feel like Tim Drake's book is dealing with it really well right now. Tim has unresolved issues about his time as Red Robin when Bruce was dead, and they're dealing with that. They're dealing with the long-term implication on his mental health, and Tim's mental health is a big theme in that book. I think there are places where you can handle it. And again, using a lesser character, you can't talk about Batman getting knocked unconscious 100 times, but you can have somebody like Tim. That's a way to tell one of those different smaller stories.
Yeah.
We know people share on social media video of horrible things that happen to people, and why they feel compelled to share that. Sometimes they're doing it to make a point that we shouldn't all look away. And it's so hard to look at. And yet superheroes like police officers and firefighters and other first responders look at that all the time.
Yeah, I can vouch for that. I have seen things that the average person should not see. But you adapt and you survive, and every once in a while it comes back on you, but you deal with it. But if we're talking about, if we segued into redemption arcs, I think the best one was we talked about the bubble universe earlier. And when it was over, there was Superman, 3 Kryptonian supervillains, and there was really only one way to stop them. And Superman got out the kryptonite that he was immune to and killed them. I mean, Superman killed. And to DC's credit, they just didn't blow it off as, well, I had to do it, but it was in another universe. I'm never going to do it again. No, he had some big problems to the point of becoming gangbuster. And once he realized what happened, he left Earth because he wasn't sure, he didn't trust himself. And it ended on, I think it was War, when he stood up the Mongol and said, "My name is Superman and I do not kill." And take that whole arc together. It's the story of somebody who, because he thought he had to, did something totally against his nature, had problems with it, flew off to protect the ones he loved, and then learned who he really was. I think that was one of DC's best redemption arcs.
Well, we've actually blown through our time. So if there's anything anybody wants to add really quickly, this would be the time. Nope. Well, then let's go around. And what, Marisa?
That was just great. Nope, let's go. Here we go. It's fine.
This is the time to tell people where they can find information about you and your work. If you have a recent, new, or upcoming project that you would like to highlight, this is a good time for it. So, Ron, will you start?
Yeah. So I actually haven't done any writing lately because I've been spending all of my spare time outside of work in a master's program, which is thankfully ending this semester, and converting a school bus into an RV, which also should be coming to a close in about 2 or 3 months. So I'm hoping to actually get back to writing again here in the near future. This RV's been about a year-long project, and it's eaten up all of my spare time. So, but if you would like to see anything about me converting a school bus into an RV, you can go to Instagram, and my Instagram handle is Ron Converts a Schoolie. So there you go.
Marisa?
Yes. So I live full time in an RV, Ron. So that is very cool. My husband's dream is to convert a van. So we'll see how that goes. He will go watch your videos for sure. Yes, you can. This year will be the Year of Valkyries. So it's an urban fantasy series coming from Chris Kennedy Publishing. One of those anything goes dimensions. People come in all over. If a story has ever been told about it, they can exist. And I'm very excited. Character development obviously matters very much to me, so you can expect to see a lot of it, and we shouldn't retcon it. So that will be coming out this year. You can catch the Valkyries Initiative, which is a kickoff anthology that's already out. Also next year, my very first book from Bane comes out. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much. Very exciting. It's called Beyond Enemies, sometime spring of 2024. That'll be very exciting. And in the meantime, you can go to my Instagram at BookDogs. I talk about my books and my dogs, mostly my dogs, I'm not going to lie. Or my website is www.marisawolf.net. Or com. I have them both. So you can come there, go to my newsletter, check out all the random things I talk about.
John?
Hey, I have 2 books coming out sometime this spring from Bold Venture Press, Wages of Sin, that's spelled S-Y-N, about basically a gun for hire in a town called Harbor City. He's morally questioned. He doesn't work in the light or the dark. He stays in the gray. Mostly he's a good guy. But it's basically, you mention Jericho Sin or his nickname, the Scarecrow, and everybody starts shaking and hoping he's not after them. Also coming out from Padwolf Publishing is Detectives of the Abyss, which features Sherlock Holmes, his goddaughter Jane Watson, and in a variety of seemingly supernatural adventures, which culminate in murder in Dracula's castle. But out now is an anthology I co-edited with Daniel Ackley Maffeo, put out by eSpec Books, called Grease Monkeys, and it's about Dieselpunk.
Okay. Do you have a website?
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have a website. You can find me on Facebook, and my books are generally available on Amazon.
Okay. Fraser?
My books, most recent books, Questionable Minds, which is a steampunk fantasy thriller, came out late last year. So did The Aliens Are Here, which is a look at alien visitors to Earth in films and TV. If everything works out, I should have a self-published short story collection, 19 Infinity, all historical fantasies taking place in the 1900s, coming out late this summer. You can find a complete list of what I'm working on and what I've had published at FraserSherman.com, Fraser, and most of my books are either under that name or Fraser A. Sherman.
Okay. David?
Just Google David R. Slayton to find me. Don't forget the R. You'll get some Florida Man types or David Slayton books. There's a lot more David Slaytons out there than I knew when I first started writing. But you can find the Adam Binder trilogy from Blackstone Publishing now in audio and every other format. That's about a broke gay witch from Guthrie, Oklahoma, who has to come save his family in Denver when his sister-in-law is possessed by a spirit. First one's White Trash Warlock. And then I have my first epic fantasy, also from Blackstone, Dark Moon, Shallow Sea, out on Halloween 2023.
And you can find me here on ConTinual, especially on the Comics Lair. My website is nancynorthcott.com, and I spend more time on Twitter than is probably good for me, and I'm at Nancy Northcott on Twitter. In the next few weeks, the third volume of my Boar King's Honor historical fantasy trilogy will come out from Falstaff. It's a World War II story, summer of 1940, Battle of Britain. I had a lot of fun writing it. And then by the end of April will be the first new bit in my Light Mage Wars paranormal romances in several years. And it's a novella called Magic and Murder. She's his prime suspect in the death of his friend. It's too bad he's falling in love with her. So thank you to everybody who served on the panel for this discussion. Thank you to all of you who are watching it. And thank you to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. For more information, visit heroesonline.com.